Okay, I think we'll get started. I'm hoping you all can hear me. I think so. Welcome to our Translational Science Seminar. This is part of our Institute's sort of a reboot of our previous series, which you all may have known as the B3s. This is the Clinical and Translational Science Institute. If you have questions as we go through this presentation, if you could put them in chat, we'll be monitoring that, and we'll then have Susan be able to answer some of those at the end. What I'd like to do is introduce Jennifer Krasniewski. She is our new director of the Institute and has been with us for some time in various roles, but is now our director, which we're thrilled about. So I'll turn it over to her, and she's going to let you know about Susan.
Thank you so much, Dee. I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Dr. Susan Mohammed, who is professor of psychology at Penn State. And we're so fortunate to have as our team science director for our Clinical and Translational Science Institute. Her research program's central focus is investigating the drivers of effective teamwork and performance. Given the prevalence of team-based structures and work settings, teams are currently one of the most actively researched areas in industrial and organizational psychology. Her secondary lines of research focus on leadership and decision-making. These areas of study intersect in that they emphasize the role of individual differences, cognition, and temporality as dominant themes. Dr. Mohammed's research follows three streams: team composition, diversity, team cognition and mental models, and the integration of time in team and leadership research. Dr. Mohammed has also been leading our CTSI Directors Council meetings with her 2 minutes of team science each month. So I'm delighted she's kicking off our Translational Science Seminar series, given that 2 minutes is never long enough to hear all of the wonderful expertise she has to share with our team. Thank you so much, Dr. Mohammed, for all you do for our CTSI, and in advance for what I know will be an outstanding presentation today.
Susan, let me just correct myself. The chat is not what we're going to use. Use the Q&A that you as attendees should be able to see, and put your questions there, please.
Thank you so much, Dee. Thank you for that very warm welcome, Jen. And we're delighted that you are leading the CTSI here at Penn State now. So I just wanted to mention at the outset that I've been studying teams for over 25 years now. And I'm just convinced that this research on psychological safety has so many benefits to offer us. And I'm currently conducting a project on psychological safety, which I hope to be able to share a little bit about today. And on a personal note, I am very passionate about psychological safety because I myself have experienced the benefits of it. And I've also suffered from the negative consequences of it when it's not there. And so I'll be speaking on both sides today. Excuse me. So just to begin, I wanted to just start off with a reflection to kind of get you in this space to better engage the material as we're presenting it. It would be great if I build in a few points of reflection throughout. So just a quick yes or no response as you can just think about it on your own. If you think my opinion counts in my team, and I know we're involved in many different types of teams, so if you could just select just the current team that you're in or the one you were in today as a point of reference. It's just yes or no, my opinion counts. And then if you think about it from the point of view of your team members, what do you think they would say? My opinion counts in my team. What do you think? Yes or no? And so you may be asking, well, why does it matter? Why does it matter if you feel like your opinion counts in your team? And I wanted to just talk about a couple of examples here to illustrate just at the outset why it matters. So if you would consider an employee who has a half-baked idea about how to improve procedures in the team, or it could be, a team member that has, a half-baked research idea that they think has promise, but they're not sure. Will they raise that issue in the team? Again, they're not sure, it's kind of half-baked. That's how ideas start, not fully developed. And they wonder if they can share it in the team. And if they do, what will happen? Will people kind of put it down? Will they not they not even be acknowledged at all? Will anybody follow up on the idea? And what if they decide not to because they don't feel comfortable sharing that half-baked idea? And what if it had enormous potential and could end up being a real scientific breakthrough? Another example is I think about a nurse who wonders if the attending physician why they did not prescribe a given medication. And she wants to double check, with the physician to make sure it wasn't an oversight. But she knows that this physician was known to berate nurses before. And so she dismissed the idea of calling and never checked up, on the physician, never checked up on whether that dosage of the medication was accurate or not. These kinds of things have implications for safety, for innovation, for creativity, for scientific breakthroughs, for member engagement, all sorts of different aspects. And this question right here, my opinion counts in my team, is really at the heart of what we know as psychological safety in the team. So right at the outset, I want to just ask you, would you be interested in learning more about a concept that fosters increased team productivity, increased team satisfaction, increased team learning, increased individual well-being, and decreased turnover? Members leave less often when you have this concept. Errors and accidents, decreased burnout in team members. Would you be interested? And if you are, that's the title and that's the topic that we're going to be talking about today, what's known as psychological safety. So you may have heard of this term, psychological safety, before. It got a boost in popularity when Charles Duhigg published an article in the New York Times a few years ago, reporting on a 5-year study by Google on what makes the best Google teams. And what they found after investigating so many different facets and aspects of teams, including who's in the team, they did all these different analyses on combinations of personality types and experiences. And they found that the who wasn't really the issue that distinguished low-performing teams from high-performing teams. Google's data indicated that it was psychological safety more than anything else that was critical to making a team work. And so what is psychological safety? I want to get into that. So that's one of the learning outcomes for today. I want to get into what it's not and some of the misconceptions that are prevalent about it. We want to talk about the why. Why should we care? Why does it matter that we pay attention to psychological safety? Why is it worth your time participating today? And then the how, strategies to foster a climate in which employees feel free to raise concerns, ask questions, admit mistakes. So let's get started with the first aspect, which is what is psychological safety, what it's not, and misconceptions. So going back to that study by Google called Project Aristotle, this was one of the conclusions that they reached. To be fully present at work, to feel psychologically safe, we must know that we can be free enough sometimes to share the things that scare us without fear of recriminations. We must be able to talk about what is messy or sad, to have hard conversations with colleagues who are driving us crazy. We can't be focused just on efficiency. We want to know that work is more than just labor. And what Project Aristotle taught people within Google is that no one wants to put on that work face when they get to the office and leave every part of non-work, activity behind or who they are. They want to be able to bring their whole selves to the workspace and the workplace. So psychological safety was a term that was pioneered by Amy Edmondson, or she had popularized the term in our organizational science and team literatures. She's a leading researcher at Harvard in the business school, and she defines it as the shared belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up, with questions, with concerns, with mistakes. So she talks about it as the absence of interpersonal fear. And the interpersonal fear is this sense of being humiliated or punished, the sense that things aren't going to go well if you bring up certain topics in the group, or you raise a concern, or you ask a question, or you admit a mistake. So it is this sense of interpersonal risk-taking when you have psychological safety, and the sense, again, that you can, the confidence that you can raise these issues and they're going to be received and not minimized, dismissed, or you're going to be shamed for them. So that is what psychological safety is. What it's not is, for example, leaders saying to their team, you know, don't bring me problems, just bring me solutions. Thinking that you have to have all the answers before you say anything, having, you know, being so concerned about high quality comments in your team that you hardly ever say anything because you're so afraid you're going to make a mistake and say something wrong. That's on the low side of psychological safety. And so some of the symptoms are you feel shamed, you know, for the mistakes that you might make, or failures or errors. And that results in you being silent because you're too reluctant to speak up. You don't want to. There's a guardedness. You're afraid of saying the wrong thing. So you kind of hold back, you know, who you are, as well as the comments and the questions and the ideas that you have. There's a lot of fear. Again, it's about interpersonal fear, the sense of, I don't want to look bad. I am afraid that people might think I'm stupid or incompetent. That's the kind of fear we're talking about with psychological safety. These all result in little learning in the team. And that's really a shame, because the whole point of a big point of team membership is learning from other people so that you get better. And then lack of cooperation, because in an environment of distrust and, you know, holding back and withholding information and thoughts and ideas, it's not the kind of climate that produces a lot of cooperation among team members. So let me talk a little bit about psychological safety, what it is, and contrast that with what it's not, because there are quite a few misconceptions about it. Psychological safety is not a personality trait. Psychological safety is a climate, you know, and a culture that is created in your team. And a climate and culture, what that indicates is the way we do things around here. And so it's a climate that leaders, in large part, they have an outsized role in helping to create that climate. Similarly, psychological safety is not extroversion and introversion. It's not about trying to get shy people to speak up in the team, or trying to get people to be less, you know, introverted in a team. It's not that at all. It's feeling safe to share ideas, regardless of what personality type you are, whether introverted or extroverted, so that everybody in the team feels this sense of safety to raise the concerns that they have. Psychological safety is also not about being nice. It's not about just praising people for everything they do. It's not about agreeing with everybody for the sake of being nice. On the contrary, it's actually about candor. It's about being direct and vulnerable to say what you really feel and to disagree, and to bring some constructive criticism to a meeting, again, said in a respectful way, but you can make hard points, you know, in psychological safety with the environment that will support that. Psychological safety is not easy, and it's not comfortable either. It's this willingness to engage in interpersonal discomfort and productive conflict. Again, saying I disagree, saying I have a point that's probably not going to be, you know, the best thing you want to hear right now, but here it is. It's that kind of thing. So it's not a result of random group chemistry or anything. It is really leaders in the team and members making a commitment to create this kind of atmosphere of interpersonal risk-taking and to avoid interpersonal fear. One other thing I'll mention about psychological safety and some misconceptions about it. Psychological safety is also not permission to slack off and to relax performance standards. In quite the contrary, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, but the research shows, a very strong research, consistent research, generalizable research across a number of different industries and context has shown that psychological safety actually promotes high performance work environments have psychological safety more often than not. On the flip side, however, psychological safety is not sufficient for high performance. So just because you have psychological safety does not mean that you will be a high performing organization or a team. You still have to have lots of the other things, you know, a skilled workforce and a worthy purpose and shared goals and all the other teaming kinds of things that we would indicate as important for high performing teams. So that's a little bit about what it is and what it's not and why, and the misconceptions. But now I want to get into why, a little bit more on why. Why do we want to foster an atmosphere of psychological safety? I already mentioned that it's not easy and it's not comfortable. So why should we invest the effort to do that? So I'll mention a few points. I'll address this first from a more practical standpoint, and then I'll get into some of the research that has been shown to promote why promoting psychological safety matters. So failure to take interpersonal risks among coworkers, among team members, can lead to business failures. It can lead to safety failures and innovation failures. Let me illustrate it with this cartoon here that this leader is saying, all those in favor say aye, everybody is saying aye, and yet in their thoughts, they are not agreeing, they're disagreeing. And my favorite is the guy saying no, no, 1,000 times no, and yet he's saying aye. He has 1,000 no's, and yet he can't share one of them or doesn't feel comfortable enough sharing one of them for the good of the organization. And it seems that in this team, they prefer others' agreement to raising the concerns that they have about that. And the worst part about this is that the boss, seems to be very happy to hear everybody's agreement and thinks that everything is fine. And the tragedy of this is that people feel like it's possible to create environments where people are more afraid of failing. The customer, the client, the patient, in the case of healthcare and customer service positions, the clients, the customers, other team members, they're afraid of failing, than to look bad in front of their colleagues. And so this is why, in this case, business failures can result from this dynamic. Safety failures, I mentioned that nurse at the beginning, in the example, not wanting to double check with the physician the dosage on the medication because of an interpersonal fear. And what if that was the wrong dosage? And yet, it went forward and the patient was adversely affected because of this unwillingness and this discomfort in raising these concerns. It also happens with innovation. Again, a lot of innovation starts with a half-baked idea that you're not sure of, and it's iterated upon if you do share it in a team by other team members who then add to it, and it grows, and then it can become a scientific breakthrough. But it starts very small. It starts as, again, an undeveloped idea. And that's why this atmosphere of psych safety is so critical to nurture those thoughts, those concerns that start very small, but may be really important to the work of the team. So speaking up is really costly, especially in the context in which we find ourselves, in the world in which we find ourselves. We live in a VUCA world. This was a term that was popularized by the Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And what it stands for is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. If that doesn't describe research, I don't know what does. In the science teams, in the grand challenges in which we find ourselves in this world on sustainability and healthcare and poverty and any number, cybersecurity, whatever it might be. We live in this kind of world where nobody is going to have, no one person is going to have all the answers, no one discipline, no one industry, no one nation is going to have it. So we need everybody's input. We also live in a knowledge economy. So it's about what you know. And so those individual ideas, the out of the box, the half-baked ideas, they add value and they are important to be shared. And sometimes the greatest scientific breakthroughs may come from the least, the member of the team that has the least status that you would expect you wouldn't necessarily expect that from. And so again, everybody's input is important. But the valuable ideas that are worth paying attention to, they won't ever even get said if you don't feel safe to bring them up in a team. So again, the kicker of all this is when your team or group lacks psychological safety, you're not going to know it. You're not going to know who had a great idea but held back from sharing it. All you're going to hear is the silence. You're not going to know who needed help but didn't ask for it. And maybe then went on to make an error, cause an accident because they needed the help and they needed to be trained. They needed someone to come alongside, but they didn't feel comfortable. And therefore, it led to detrimental consequences in the team. Who made a mistake but covered it up. And then that mistake, again, may cause accidents, may cause very high safety prone errors. And then again, in all of this, members don't learn. So if somebody does need help and asks for assistance, maybe that helps to train somebody else in the team. Made a mistake and you admit it in the team because you do feel this atmosphere of safety, then other members learn and the mistakes and the errors are minimized over time. So again, you don't know in this, and that's except for hearing the silence. So silence when voice was possible and when it was needed, it occurs more often than you realize in scientific teams, in healthcare teams, in teams across the board. And every time, we don't contribute in a team, we're withholding, from other team members. We're robbing our colleagues of those moments of learning that they could learn something from us. We could learn something from them. So it matters. And again, those impressions that we're trying to build in the team, we want to look smart. We want to look important. We want to look competent. We don't want to be the negative person in the team. So we're busy managing all of these impressions, and all of us do this, that we don't create, a better organization through giving our input and our honest opinions and offering our candor. So let me talk a little bit about the research evidence now about psychological safety. And we have now over 20 years of this kind of research, and enough to have a meta-analysis that was done recently on psychological safety, which is a compilation of a lot of different studies across, again, various industries and organizations, and from education and military and healthcare and manufacturing. All these different types of studies have been done over the years. So this meta-analysis showed that teams with a higher psychological safety, they produce more valuable team outcomes. And what we mean by that is task performance increases when there's psychological safety. A lot of very robust, strong evidence for that. Team creativity and innovation is also enhanced by psychological safety. And members are more satisfied in their teams in an environment where, again, they feel safe to bring their whole selves. They feel safe to say, hey, I have a, kind of a wacky idea here. I'm going to throw it out and see what happens. That is the environment where members, want to engage and they want to contribute and they feel safe to do so. It also affects processes, increased processes as well. So information sharing, and of course, team environments, live and fail based on the information that is shared in these collective environments. It's kind of the point of a team, and especially interdisciplinary teams and scientific teams. It's all about the information that you share. And again, if you don't have psychological safety, one of the first things to go is you withhold the information, you withhold the ideas, you withhold the concerns. Learning is enhanced, as I mentioned several times before, and then work engagement. So members feel more involved and want to be more involved, more invigorated by the topics that they're covering in their team. In other studies, there have been a number of studies that, especially in healthcare contexts, where retention is increased as a result of psychological safety. And in non-psychologically safe environments, members leave, team members leave, lower accidents and errors, and then lower burnout as well, which is a great, again, individual well-being is enhanced in addition to team outcomes that we want to see in a team. What's interesting about this, and in this work, they've shown that the effects are strongest for complex, knowledge-intensive tasks involving creativity and sense-making. Again, this is the very essence of research teams and scientific discovery and healthcare breakthroughs and all of the things that we're so wedded to and concerned about in the CTSI context. Speaking of the healthcare context, I'll just mention a couple of the studies that, just highlighting a few. Amy Edmondson, again, who's the guru of psychological safety, has done probably over half of her research in the healthcare context. So there's a lot of it out there. In one study done by Amy Edmondson and one of her students, reduced infant mortality rates decreased by 18% when members spoke up to stop mistakes. And this was in 23 neonatal intensive care units. So again, affecting death or life, it matters because of psychological safety that they were able to show in that study. In another study done by one of my colleagues, Alicia Grandi, she was able to show in hospital units where members felt psychologically safe with other coworkers that it reduced the burnout. Why? Because they have to engage in so much effort to take care of their patients and their clients and care for them, and they're giving out a lot. And so if they are able from their coworkers to be interpersonally safe, to raise those concerns, to just say, hey, I'm having a really bad day, and get some encouragement and some resilience from other coworkers, then that prevented them from burning out. So again, another effect of psychological safety. One of the things about conflict is we know that some conflict can be good in a team, and the type we call task conflict, where members have a divergence of opinions, of different ideas, and they're getting all their different perspectives out on the table, and they're disagreeing about opinions and perspectives on the team. So that can enhance team performance in some of the work that we've seen, but it also can decrease team performance when other things aren't there. It's very easy for members who disagree about ideas to go, it's a thin line to sometimes going over into what we call relationship conflict, where it's not just, I don't like your idea, it's I don't like you. And what prevents task conflict from having the negative consequences, and what helps promote the positive consequences of task conflict? It's psychological safety. Psychological safety makes the difference in that kind of context, swaying it towards the positive benefits instead of the negative weaknesses and limitations. I'll also mention that there is some work as well on diversity and psychological safety. And diversity in our literature, we've known across a lot of different types, demographic and personality and expertise in different disciplines as well. Diversity can be a double-edged sword. Yes, it increases innovation and creativity, and that's what we want, learning from other cultures and perspectives and races and genders and disciplines, all of that. But it also can make things very difficult in a team. Members conflict. It's harder to interact with people who are very different than you in the process of it, even though, again, long-term, it has the positive benefits. So what helps promote, again, similar to conflict, the positives of diversity and minimize the negatives? It's psychological safety. That in an environment of psychological safety, in the midst of a lot of diversity, you can have enhanced performance because the psychological safety enables the positives of diversity to come out, reducing some of the conflict and the frustration and tension that can result as well. There's a lot more I could say about psychological safety research, but I'm going to, in the interest of time, move on from here. But I want to ask you as well to look at these items in this slide. This is the going measure of psychological safety. It was developed by Amy Edmondson back in 1999 on her dissertation. And it's 7 items. This is the way we measure psychological safety. I will say I did tweak a little bit of, I did reverse code a couple of the items, 3 of the items specifically, to be able to do this and to make it a little bit more user-friendly. But look at these items, and I'd like for you to just pick one that you think is most problematic in your team. Again, the team that you are focusing on for this session. Number 1, if you make a mistake on this team, it's not held against you. Number 2, members of this team are able to bring up problems and tough issues. Number 3, people on this team don't reject others for being different. Number 4, it's safe to take a risk on this team. Number 5, it's easy to ask other members of this team for help. Number 6, no one on this team would deliberately act in a way that undermines my efforts. Number 7, working with members of this team, my unique skills and talents are valued and utilized. So if you just pick out one item that you believe is the most problematic in your team, kind of keep it in mind as we go forward. Just give you a moment to think a little bit about that. So what I want to do now is go into the third and the final learning outcome for today, which is more the how. How do you enhance psychological safety given all the positive benefits that we just talked about in research and practice? Before I do that, I just want to point out some of the challenges that have to be overcome before we can kind of get into the nitty-gritty of tools that you can utilize to enhance psychological safety. So that question that I asked at the beginning, my opinion counts in my team. If you tended to answer no for yourself and maybe for the members of your team, it turns out you're not alone, because psychological safety in the surveys that have been done is not the norm. In one study, 85% of employees reported being unable to speak up about a matter they felt was important. And then in a 2017 Gallup poll, only 30% of employees felt that their opinion mattered at work. So again, that question, my opinion counts, was represented here. And that's why I wanted to ask it of you at the beginning to kind of get your head in this space. But some people project that by moving the ratio to 6 out of 10, so doubling the percentage there, organizations could realize a 27% reduction in turnover, a 40% reduction in safety incidents, and a 12% increase in creativity. So if that was the projection, would you feel like that's worth the investment to engage in the behaviors and the framing, as we'll talk about, the attitudes that are needed to foster an environment of psychological safety? So that's the kind of the question before us here for all of us. I will mention as well, one of the hurdles, again, of psychological safety is that lower status members generally feel less psychologically safe. And again, this is really hard because if you're lower status in a team, you may even the effects of not speaking up are compounded, in a team, because you already feel you're on the low end of the totem pole, so to speak, and now you feel less psychologically safe, and so the chances of you speaking up are even more diminished. This is based on some work, one study, although other studies have found this as well, where physicians in a healthcare context, physicians felt the most psychologically safe, and nurses and respiratory therapists felt the least psychologically safe. And so this is a really important slide, and I want to point it out as we get into the nitty-gritty of how we build psychological safety. But we have to get past these barriers. The fact is that no one wakes up in the morning wanting to look ignorant, incompetent, disruptive, or critical. Nobody does that. And we have these impression management strategies down at a very early age because we're trying to avoid looking ignorant, incompetent, disruptive, and critical. So this kind of impression management is second nature to us. What do I mean by that? Well, if you look ignorant, you don't ask questions, right? You won't speak up to say, I don't understand, or could you go over that again? Because you already feel ignorant. You don't want to exacerbate that by asking a question and taking the risk that other members are going to think, wow, she doesn't know that. This, by the way, is really prevalent in interdisciplinary teams, which are the focus of a lot of the CTSI work. And I do a lot of work in interdisciplinary teams with engineers, with computer scientists, with information science and technology faculty, and people in very different fields than my own as a social scientist. And I face this in meetings where acronyms are being thrown out. I don't know what they're talking about. Do I risk saying, can you define that for me? Can you explain that? And if I don't feel safe in that environment, then I go through the meeting and I don't really know what they're talking about. And how can I really contribute in a valuable way that's going to really enhance the science and lead to an interdisciplinary, or what we like to call transdisciplinary breakthrough that's more than the sum of the parts, and we're coming up with something novel that we've never seen before. That you can't even identify the different disciplines because it's just such an amalgamation and a merging of different disciplines. That is highly unlikely if I don't ask the questions. I've got to feel safe enough to say, I don't understand what you're saying. Can you try again? And then likewise, I'm throwing out terms as well. And do people on the more technical side, can they stop me and say, please explain. I have no idea of I can get talking about experimentation with humans, and I realize that they've never done an experiment with a human being. They're into computational modeling. And it's, again, these moments of, okay, I need to ask a lot of questions in here, and they have to ask a lot of questions in order for this to go forward. So again, we don't want to look incompetent, especially as scientists, right? That's our whole job, is to knowledge, to know things, right? And so we won't admit weaknesses and mistakes if that is the case. We don't want to be disruptive. And so we don't want to interrupt the meeting and say, I have a suggestion of what we could do maybe to improve. We don't want to seem critical and a downer, a Debbie Downer, so to speak. And say, I have a comment that, is more on the negative side, or it's a constructive criticism. So without this atmosphere of psychological safety, employees, team members are more afraid of looking bad in front of coworkers than failing, patients, customers, or not, leading to scientific breakthroughs that could happen if they raise these concerns. So with that as a kind of a backdrop, that's what we're up against when we're trying to build this atmosphere of psychological safety, these ingrained habits that prevent us from speaking up, ingrained kind of attitudes and fears interpersonally. How do we go past them? How do we break some of those barriers? So I want to talk about three different things. One is the leader setting the stage, and leaders do have an outsized role in building psychological safety in a team. It is up to all the team members, and all the team members play a role and can play a role. But I'm going to talk specifically about leaders in that context. Inviting engagement and responding appreciatively. So let's start with setting the stage. So again, leaders have a responsibility here to frame the work as VUCA. I already talked about that, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Saying things like, we've never solved this problem before. One of the things that I say to my graduate students in my lab all the time, and undergraduates as well, if we knew what we were doing, it would not be called research. And that's a quote from Albert Einstein. But that's the kind of framing that helps elicit participation. You are needed, regardless of where your hierarchy, regardless of your status, and what kind of background you come from. Your ideas are valuable. We need them. It's important that you contribute to this team. Framing the work is collaborative and interdependent. Again, today's problems, what we're dealing with, these healthcare challenges, these scientific conundrums that we're dealing with, it's not going to be solved by one person, lab, one discipline. So we need to hear from you. And that this is a learning problem, not an execution problem. Having what we call more of a growth mindset, shifting from knowing that you have to know things to learning and improving. We're all in this together. We all can make valuable contributions. So that's sort of the frame that you want to try to create as a leader in whatever team context you're leading. Another aspect of this, and this is a huge one, is being able to acknowledge your fallibility and limits as a leader in the team. And again, part of what people look for in a leader is to be competent and to know what you're doing. And so the way that you can do this and still be competent and be very much have that sense of leadership that people need in a team. But at the same time, be vulnerable is say things like, I may miss something. I'm working on a number of different projects. And so I really need your attention to detail here on this. We've never, again, solved this problem before, going back to VUCA and a knowledge environment that we're all trying to contribute to. We're all learning in this together. Shifting from the need to be right to be open to possibilities. I'm open to being challenged, thinking outside the box, and creating that kind of atmosphere where that's welcomed and encouraged. A big part of it is fostering this culture of curiosity, asking lots of questions as a leader, which really communicates that you are interested in what others have to say. And then modeling inclusivity. So diversity is clearly important, and we need it. And part of the beauty of a team is you invite diverse perspectives and demographics and disciplines and perspectives and all of that. But the issue is, if people are very diverse and you've done a great job creating that diverse environment in a team, but you don't create this atmosphere of psychological safety, that diversity is not going to come out, and it's not going to benefit the team in the way that it could and it should. The other thing is to be aware of the power and status that influences that limit psychological safety. So I was just sharing that lower status individuals have a harder time feeling psychologically safe. And so one of the ideas that's very simple to implement is actually start your meeting with the lowest status person in the group for presenting, and it changes the entire atmosphere and the trajectory of that meeting. The second point I will make, and it very much coincides with the first, on setting the stage as a leader, framing the work as we need everybody's input, and inviting that engagement, is creating some ground rules for the meeting discussions. So it's very useful to start off a meeting, or even if you have an ongoing group, you can do this really at any time, but just you can backtrack and say, let's talk about ground rules. I just did this recently in my lab group, the beginning of the spring. We're beginning of a brand new year, and it's a great opportunity to kind of revisit some of the ground rules we've had before and then come up with some new ones. So things like in this group, we show respect for everyone's ideas, even if we disagree. We avoid conversations that are dominated just by one or two members. We want really an atmosphere where everybody contributes. We're going to pursue more even turn taking in the discussion, and if you are not speaking up, we want to know why, and we want to invite you to participate, because again, your inputs really matters. Providing time in the meetings for team members to voice their concerns. That's a big one. So if your agenda is so full, and nobody really ever gets to say anything, there's no room for anyone to raise an idea, to raise a concern, to admit a mistake in the group, then, you want to try to create an environment, time for that to happen. If a team member isn't contributing for a long period of time, then contacting them privately and asking them, how you can facilitate their participation in the meeting. And this is going to take repetition. So again, what we're up against is these constant feelings of, I have a concern, but I'm not sure if I should raise it. I have a question, but am I going to look incompetent and ignorant and stupid if I raise it? Those constantly come, and it's going to take a lot to overcome those barriers. So a one-time approach, of inviting engagement is not enough. You really have to try to do it on a regular basis. What you want to avoid in this effort to invite engagement is yes or no questions. And you also want to not settle for yes or no answers. And so you want to dig deeper. You want to encourage the out of the box thinking. What are we missing? Who has a different perspective? Who's going to play devil's advocate? Or let's play devil's advocate and think a little bit deeper about this. Unpack that. Tell me more. Can you give us an example? What would happen if we did this? It's all in an effort to promote, the thinking that is going to lead to better outcomes and more creative ideas. The last point I'll make about this is responding appreciatively. So even if you have set the stage and you've invited engagement, psychological safety may be damaged if you don't respond appreciatively. The first time someone actually has the courage to say something in a meeting and the response is crickets and silence and nobody says anything and nobody follows up, what are the chances that that person is going to speak up again? They're not. And so this responding appreciatively, responding in a productive manner for psychological safety is really critical. So what you want to try to do, and in the group, this doesn't have to be just one person's job, is affirm every member's comment in some way. Thank you so much for bringing that up. That was a good point. I appreciate you speaking up. I'm not sure I understand. Can you explain more? Something. To again, invite this engagement, especially when it's an unpopular viewpoint, or especially when a member admits a mistake. Showing genuine interest in the comments that are made, not just pretending to listen. Disagreeing with the idea in meetings, but again, accepting the person, creating that atmosphere of respect. Supporting members and helping them to get back on track, if they have gotten off course. And then, taking the concerns seriously. If you don't follow up on an idea that members had, then, explaining why. Maybe, it wouldn't work because, or we ran into some research problems, but we very much value the input and we want you to continue to give your ideas. I kind of recently was challenged on this, where a member of my lab came to me and said, I made a mistake on the data that we had. And it was one of these things where, again, how am I going to respond? And how do I create the atmosphere of psych safety where errors in data don't end up in the publication and the write-up and the conference presentations, because we create in this lab an atmosphere of psychological safety where these errors are taken care of internally before they ever hit external. And so I very much affirmed that and said, I respect you raising this error, and thank you, and please continue to do that, and let's get it worked out, and how can I help? That's the kind of atmosphere that's needed. All right, we're running. I want to create some time for questions, but I just want to mention something that we're doing in my I'm collaborating with Dr. Scarlett Miller and Sarah Ritter and some other faculty as well in engineering. And we're trying to facilitate psychological safety in engineering student teams. We're trying to create some interventions. And one of the things that we're piloting right now is an intervention to try to have these design teams, freshman engineering design teams, build psychological safety, where again, it's really critical that they're trying to come up with a creative idea, and yet if members aren't comfortable speaking up and offering those half-baked ideas or raising questions or concerns, they're not going to get the creative output that they want. So what we did was actually give everybody in the team a lens. So these 4 lenses of psychological safety that are based on the interventions that I just talked about, kind of framing the issues as a leader, welcoming input, inviting engagement, and responding appreciatively. So we have one person, they're generally 4-person teams. So we give one person the job of point of view shifter, where your job is to, kind of delve deeper into if only positive comments are being raised about the design that you came up with, shift to the negative, or vice versa. If only negative comments, what's positive about it? And that perspective. Turn taking equalizers to try to encourage even turn taking in the team where everybody's contributing. Affirmation advocate is, as you can imagine, responding appreciatively and productively, and having someone in the team, being watchful of that every comment is affirmed in some way, followed up on in some way. And then the creativity promoter, since that is the job of these teams to be more creative, to try to frame it as more out of the box thinking. So we have some videos that we show them where we talk about psychological safety and these various lenses. We give each person a role in the team for that session. The next session, they have to do it as well, but they shift lenses in the team. So by the end of their project, they should have all taken a turn with these lenses. The data is still being analyzed, but we do have some promising evidence that it is making a difference, and that it is promoting higher psychological safety in teams that have this lens. So I offer this just as a suggestion of one thing you can do in your team. You can come back, go to your team with this information that you learned here today and say, I'm interested in fostering and increasing psychological safety in this team, and I could use some help, and what are your ideas about this, and how can we do this? I envision that your members will be ecstatic that you're even raising this and talking about it in your environment, and then maybe giving every person a role it's their role in the team to promote psychological safety. So in closing, main takeaways are when team members feel safe to take these interpersonal risks, you have higher team outcomes, and also individual well-being is enhanced as well. Leaders can foster psychological safety if they set the stage by being vulnerable, being open, having some humility about you, inviting engagement, responding to input appreciatively. And psychological safety is uncomfortable, and it does take time, it does take some effort, but the benefits to worker well-being, team performance, innovation, and others are worth it in the long run. So I would like for you to think about one idea or action from today that you would put in practice this week. If you feel inclined to put it in the chat or the question and answer, I'd love to hear your comments, and others I think can glean from that as well. And
we do have a question.
Yeah.
Did you want those now, or did you want to?
Please. Yes, thank you.
Justin, go ahead. I know you had Well, I hope I made it so you could do that. There you go.
Hi, Dee. Thank you. And hi, Dr. Mohammed. My question was, and thank you so much for this. This is really great work. And I'll say that I've done a consultation with you through the CTSI, and it was wonderfully well received. So thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you.
My question was, it seems like one of the greatest challenges in establishing a team culture that supports psychological safety is our own ingrained kind of upbringing and fear that we have, that, going into these meetings, someone's going to think I'm, like you mentioned, not competent or whatever. So what can people do when they're not the leader of the team to help build this? And let's just say you talk to the leader and they're not interested, or maybe, it's a combination pack of bringing you in with the leader and helping, but how, just in a kind of like a normal group setting, how can you help make this better?
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that question, and thank you so much for that, because reality is there's a lot that team members can do to foster this. In fact, you could, even if the leader is proactive, but you have just one team member that's not, that creates a sense of people don't feel safe around that team member, it can derail psychological safety in the team. I've seen that happen practically. And so members play a really important role as well. So some of the advice that I gave, like inviting engagement, any team member can do that. Somebody says a comment in a team and you say, can you unpack that? Can you explain more? That's an interesting comment, but I need to understand a little bit more, or I'd like to piggyback off of that idea. Any member can do that. For example, I was just leading a meeting, and we were talking about our recruitment for graduate students and how do we improve and how do we change our processes. One of the members raised an issue of a DEI concern, which is, we say we want members that fit, and we don't really define what that is. And that can be very off-putting to people that look different and don't feel like they fit. And so what do we do about that? It was a very important concern. And I was leading the meeting and I said, that is a very important concern. And I affirmed the comment, and then other comments were raised. But it was another team member who wasn't the leader that raised that again and said, I'd like to come back to that DEI comment that so-and-so made in the team and iterate on that. I think it deserves more attention. I didn't do that as the leader, again, but it was very important. So my role as the leader was, thank you, for raising that concern. And yes, let's give more time to it. Thank you. I really appreciate you raising that. So things like that can be done. Curiosity, asking a lot of questions, but also the responding appreciatively. If the leader doesn't do a lot of that, team members absolutely can, just say, thank you for raising that concern. That is a really good point. I'd like to come back to a comment that so-and-so made earlier and give more attention to it. That's very important. And then also team members taking the initiative to be vulnerable and say, I don't understand, and I want to, so could you please explain more? Things like that. That goes a long way. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you. That's great.
Other questions?
Susan, will the slides be available? Are they?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
we'll make those.
available.
Yes. Okay.
So if I could just close out by just saying, we do have a team science toolbox that is online that will be in the slides as well. Psychological safety is part of a larger issue than we can talk about here today, but it goes into psychological safety as well as a number of other issues as well that may be helpful to you in building effective teams. And then I also have some resources here, Amy Edmondson's book, her TED Talk, the Google Aristotle results, and some other things that you might want to take a look at. So thank you so much for your very kind attention, and I wish you the best. I bless you to have team environments where you feel psychologically safe, you feel psychologically safe, and other members feel psychological safety with you as the leader as well. So
Thank you, Susan. This was great. I know it's not always easy doing a presentation like this to sort of faceless groups, but that was really wonderful. We will share these slides and get them out to you soon. And I believe all of you will probably also get a little bit of a survey. Oh, wait a minute, maybe there's one final comment here. Let me look. Nope, everybody's just saying thank you. So we really appreciate it, Susan. And we'll look forward. You'll be hearing about our next in the series soon. And we hope you all can attend. Have a great day.